The night air pressed heavy against the lamplights of Redhill, the kind of night that seemed to promise secrets waiting in the shadows. Loveday Brook, a woman whose sharp eyes missed little, stepped down from the carriage at the station. She had been summoned by Inspector Gunning himself, a man with a reputation for stubborn suspicion and an eye for trouble. His concern was urgent, a rash of country house robberies that had spread like wildfire through the district. He suspected an organized gang. But what made this case extraordinary was his belief that the heart of the operation was not hardened criminals or masked men, but a group of women dressed in nuns' habits. They called themselves the Redhill Sisterhood. The inspector's words hung heavy in the air as they rode together. They go about in blue serge dresses, calling themselves sisters, gathering donations for crippled orphans, but every time they pay a visit, within hours. The nearest manor is burglarized. Coincidence? Not likely. Miss Brook raised a skeptical brow. Nuns. Inspector, you think women in habits are pulling the strings of these burglaries? I'll tell you plain, Miss Brook. One of them, Sister Monica, has a face so coarse, so criminal, I'd swear her guilt from sight alone. Brook's lips curved, faintly amused but cautious. A woman's face is not enough to hang her. Inspector, let us deal in facts, not phrenology. Still, she took her role. Her cover was that of a nursery governess seeking work, lodging in a draper's shop across from the Sisterhood's little house in paved court. From there she could watch, unseen, as the sisters set out each morning at precisely 10 o'clock with their donkey cart and children in tow, always punctual, always in plain view, and always followed by burglary. From her room, Brook observed them. Sister Monica, tall, severe, with that rough-hewn face Gunning had described, and Sister Anna, strikingly beautiful, but sad, carrying herself with a grace that made Brook wonder what shadows lay in her past. The children seemed genuinely cared for, their small hands clinging to the sisters' skirts, their laughter echoing down the narrow court. It was not the behavior of callous criminals, yet suspicion remained. The landlord, John Murray, had first reported them to the police. He claimed their money was endless, their benefactors unnamed, their founder a wealthy lady who insisted on secrecy. It was an odd arrangement, and odder still, wherever their begging cart went, crime followed. Then came the stranger. A young man calling himself George White approached Brook, claiming he had seen her at a trial months before. He begged her for help. His fiancée, Annie Lee, had vanished. She had worked as a nursery governess at Woden Hall until, suddenly, she broke off their engagement in a letter, distraught. George traced her here. He was certain Annie had joined the Sisterhood. Brook listened carefully, her suspicion sharpening. His story was romantic, desperate, and yet too rehearsed. Still, she saw an opportunity. If George was eager to peer into the Sisterhood's affairs, perhaps he could act as her deputy. He could take her place in the draper's window, watching their movements, while she moved more freely. George eagerly agreed. He even boasted he would spot Annie beneath any hood. But as Brook handed him the key to the shop room, a glimmer of unease crossed her mind. His hands were rough, his speech less refined than a newspaperman's should be, his eagerness to involve himself almost too convenient. A mechanic's coil of fuse wire bulged from his pocket. Yet Brook held her doubts close. Sometimes to catch a criminal, you had to let them think they were outsmarting you. That evening, George returned with fire in his eyes. I saw her, Miss Brook. My Annie is there, among them. I swear it. But I will have her out of that place if I must pull it down with my own hands. Brook quieted him. Patience. Mr. White, you may ruin her if you rush. Still, his words lingered. If Annie was indeed among them, why had she fled her post? Why had she vanished into this sisterhood at all? And why did the pattern of burglary match so precisely their every move? Was the sisterhood merely a front for something larger? Or had they too been drawn into a net of deception? The inspector wanted evidence, not theory. Brook studied the map he gave her. Each marked country house either robbed or spared. She noted patterns the inspector dismissed. North Cape, a grand estate, was the only one lit by the marvel of electricity. Gunning thought this a safeguard. Brook was less sure. To her, every detail, every dismissal, every assumption might hide the truth. And so she kept watching, kept listening, even as eyes in the shadows watched her in return, whoever the Sisterhood truly were. She knew one thing: if she made the wrong move, she would not only fail to expose the thieves, but perhaps lose her own life in the attempt. What Brook did not yet know was that George White was no heartbroken lover at all. He was a liar, and his deception would soon pull her into a web far more dangerous than even the inspector had feared. The following morning, Brook stood at her window above the draper's shop, watching the Sisterhood begin their routine. At precisely 10 o'clock, Sister Monica and Sister Anna emerged, guiding the donkey cart with 3 bundled children perched inside. Their habits caught the pale November sunlight, their movements steady and disciplined, like actors in a performance they had rehearsed countless times. George, her so-called deputy, watched eagerly from the corner, his bicycle leaning at the ready. He raised a hand in subtle acknowledgement before pedaling off after the cart. Brook felt her unease deepen. His pursuit was too eager, his role too perfectly suited for infiltration. Yet, to draw out the truth, she allowed it. By afternoon, George returned to her hotel with news. They went to Woden Hall. He reported breathlessly. One of the older sisters went inside, and when she came out, she carried a bundle in a basket, food, maybe clothes. But I tell you, they're using this routine as cover. They find out which houses are vulnerable, and then robbery follows. Brook kept her voice calm. And Annie. I saw her again. She stayed behind with the little ones, but it was her. I swear it. My Annie. His eyes burned with desperate certainty. Miss Brook, we can't waste time. They'll twist her, make her part of whatever they're doing. Or perhaps she seeks refuge. Brook countered softly. Has it occurred to you she may have joined them of her own will? George's face hardened. Never. She loves me. The inspector. Meanwhile, grew increasingly restless. He wanted immediate action, a raid, arrests. But Brook urged patience. Patterns revealed themselves only to those willing to watch closely. And then she spotted the detail that would shift everything. That night, she examined George's bicycle lamp as he leaned it against the wall. Its glass bore a tiny star-shaped crack. The frame dented, the hook missing. It had been fastened instead with a scrap of electrical fuse wire. The detail pricked her memory earlier. He had claimed his light had failed him when he first followed the sisters, yet this was not the lamp of a newcomer. This was the lamp of someone who had been here long enough to repair and reuse, someone who knew his tools well. The following morning, George made another slip. He spoke casually of the draper's shop as though he had always known it was Brook's observation post, though she had never told him. Then, when pressed, he fumbled with the latchkey she had given him, revealing again the coil of fuse wire tucked in his waistcoat pocket, a tool he carried unconsciously, not like a reporter, but like an electrician. Bit by bit, the mask of George White unraveled. His voice carried no trace of Newcastle, though he claimed to be from there. His hands were rough with labor, his knowledge of grammar laughable for a newspaperman, and his supposed fiancée, Annie Lee, remained mysteriously silent, never acknowledging him, never glancing his way. Brook's suspicions hardened. This was no broken-hearted suitor. This was a man playing a role, and a dangerous one. Still, she let him continue his charade. For sometimes the best trap is the one your quarry believes he set for you. She even gave him a letter for Inspector Gunning, knowing George would rush to deliver it without question. The message warned of a likely burglary at Woden Hall, or so George believed. But in truth, Brook's careful phrasing was meant to mislead the very man she suspected, while giving the inspector enough to prepare elsewhere. That evening, under the cloak of darkness, the inspector set his men near North Cape, the one house in the district lit by electricity. Brook had pieced it together. George, whose true identity was George Lee, was not chasing Annie to rescue her. Annie was his sister, not his sweetheart. Their father, Arthur Lee, newly released from prison, had long sought to drag his children into crime. Annie had fled him, seeking safety with the Sisterhood. George had taken another path into deceit and burglary, alongside his father and accomplices. The Sisterhood, it seemed, were pawns in a larger scheme. Their daily rounds provided cover, allowing the Lees to study households, routines, and weaknesses, but their hearts, at least in part, seemed genuine. Brook had seen tenderness in Sister Monica as she lifted a crippled child into her arms, a tenderness criminals never possessed. That night, as the inspector's men waited in the shadows, the truth came crashing down. Burglars crept toward North Cape, confident in their plan to silence the lights and slip inside. But the police were ready. Shots rang out, shouts split the air, and in the chaos, 2 men were dragged into custody. One of them, bloodied and snarling, was George Lee. The other, to Brook's grim recognition, was John Murray, the landlord who had first denounced the Sisterhood. The irony was sharp. The very man who claimed to expose crime was part of it all along. Brook's letter, delivered eagerly by George himself, had set the trap that caught him. But as the dust settled, a darker truth remained. Arthur Lee, the father, had been the true architect. Annie Lee had fled him, hiding in plain sight among the Sisterhood, desperate to escape his grasp, now with George unmasked. Brook faced a haunting question. Had the Sisterhood been guilty all along, or were they merely a shield for desperate souls? And what of Annie? Was she complicit, or simply another victim caught in the web her family had spun? The answers would not come easily. But one thing was certain: the case was far from finished, and the Sisterhood's secrets were only beginning to unravel. The wind howled across Redhill as if to scatter the night's chaos. But inside the inspector's quarters, the air was heavy with smoke and suspicion. George Lee, no longer hiding behind his false name, sat bound and bleeding, his face twisted with resentment. John Murray, the landlord, cursed under his breath, his eyes darting like a cornered rat. The inspector paced, his boots striking the floor with sharp finality, while Brook remained silent, studying each man as though their very breathing might betray the final threads of the scheme. "So," Inspector Gunning muttered at last, "the Sisterhood were your perfect veil. 4 women and a donkey cart, begging for charity, while you robbed the grandest houses in Surrey. Clever, almost too clever." George spat on the floor. "Think what you like. You'll never prove Annie was part of it. She's no thief." Brook leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. "Because she isn't. She fled you. George, she fled your father too. You pretended to be her suitor so you could use me to find her. But all the while, she wanted nothing more than to escape the life you dragged her into." The young man's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his silence confirmed what Brook already knew. Annie Lee was not complicit. She was a daughter of crime, but not a criminal herself. Inspector Gunning turned his gaze to Murray. "And you, a landlord, willing to betray your tenants to save your own skin, renting your house to women you thought you could use as bait, then plotting robberies with the Lees behind the scenes. What drove you?" "Murray gambling debts." Murray's lips curled into a bitter smile. "A man's got to eat. Besides, no one questions charity. Who would ever suspect crippled children and women in habits?" "Women in habits may deceive men like you," Brook answered sharply, "but kindness cannot be feigned forever. I've seen Sister Monica cradle a starving child with such tenderness that no thief alive could imitate it. Whatever your schemes," Murray, you cannot soil that truth." The inspector raised a hand. "Enough philosophy, Miss Brook. We've caught the men, but there's still the father, Arthur Lee. He's the architect, isn't he? The others are pawns. Where is he?" George sneered. "You think my father would be fool enough to sit waiting for you? He's halfway across the county by now." But Brook shook her head. "No. He is too invested. Arthur Lee has been planning this for years. He sought his children not for love, but for leverage. Annie escaped him once. He will come again, not for Jules, but for her." That thought haunted her as she returned to her lodgings. The draper's shop was dark, its shutters drawn, but in the distance she could hear the faint sound of hymn singing from paved court. The Sisterhood were gathered, voices rising in a fragile chorus, children humming along. For a moment, the music seemed to wash the grime of deceit from the air, and yet, beneath it, Brook felt the undercurrent of danger. The following morning, she confronted the sisters. "Tell me the truth," she said quietly, her eyes moving from Sister Monica to Sister Anna. "Why did you welcome Annie Lee among you?" Sister Monica's face, coarse though it was, softened. "Because she was lost, and because even the lost deserve a home. She told us enough that her family had ruined her, that she sought peace. We gave her shelter. Is that a crime?" "No," Brook answered, her voice firm. "But the men who use your name, who follow your cart, who break into houses under your shadow, they are criminals, and they are closing in. If you protect Annie, you must prepare yourselves for the storm that follows her." Sister Anna, her beauty dimmed by sorrow, lifted her eyes. "Annie is not guilty. Whatever her blood, whatever her father's sins, she is ours now. These children cling to her. They need her, and so do we." Brook believed her, but belief was not enough. The inspector wanted evidence. Courts demanded proof. And Arthur Lee lurked somewhere in the dark, waiting to make his move. That evening, Brook took a walk to North Cape once more. She found herself drawn to the small engine house, where Mr. Dunham, the electrician, proudly explained again how the great mansion glowed with electric light. The future. "Miss Brook," he declared, resting his hand on the generator, "with this, darkness cannot touch us." But Brook, staring at the humming wires, thought otherwise. Darkness always finds a way. Mr. Dunham, even light can be extinguished if you strike at the source. And she was right. That night, as the inspector's men guarded North Cape, a sudden silence fell. The lights flickered, then died. The burglars had struck the engine house first. Shots rang out. Chaos tore through the halls. And though the police prevailed, one officer fell wounded. Among the captured was John Murray, his face pale with terror, and George Lee, snarling like a caged animal. But Arthur Lee was nowhere to be found. In the stillness after the battle, Brook walked through the carnage, broken glass, spilled silver, the smell of gunpowder in the air. She could not help but think the men were caught, yes, but the heart of the storm still lingered. Arthur Lee would not give up. He would come again for his daughter, for his schemes, for whatever vengeance he thought the world owed him. And when he did, Brook knew she would be waiting. But what she did not yet realize was that Arthur's plan had always been more twisted than a simple burglary. His sights were not merely on jewels or plate, but on breaking the Sisterhood itself, and Annie was the key. The days that followed were restless ones in Redhill. The inspector's men boasted of their victory at North Cape, polishing their boots and retelling the clash as if it were a war won. Yet Brook felt no satisfaction. For all their triumph, the true villain still walked free. Arthur Lee had not been among the captured, and every instinct told her that he was close, watching, waiting for his moment. The Sisterhood went about their work with an almost defiant normalcy. Each morning, precisely at 10 o'clock, the donkey cart rattled into the lanes, children bundled in blankets, sisters collecting alms. To the casual eye, they were simple women of charity. But to Brook, every step felt like bait dangling on a hook, drawing Arthur toward them. She decided to confront Annie herself. The young woman sat in the Sisterhood's modest parlor, a child's small hand resting in her lap. Her beauty was not dazzling, but fragile, her eyes rimmed with the quiet sorrow of one who had seen too much. "Annie," Brook said gently, "your brother has been caught. George lied to me, lied to the inspector, lied even about you. He claimed you were his fiancée. In truth, you are his sister. And it was not love that brought him here, it was crime." Annie's lips trembled. "I know. I knew the moment he walked into paved court. My father sent him. He wanted me back, not as a daughter, but as another pawn in his schemes. I could not face him, so I hid. The sisters gave me refuge. It was the only way I could breathe." Brook leaned closer. "He will come again, your father. He will not stop until he has you. Tell me, Annie, do you fear him?" The young woman's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "Every day, but more than fear. I feel shame. His name follows me like a curse, no matter where I go. People see not Annie, but Arthur Lee's daughter. If he finds me, he will drag me back into his shadow. And if I resist, he will ruin those who shelter me." It was the confirmation Brook needed. Arthur was not merely after wealth, he was after control. His children were the tools he believed would secure it. Annie had rejected him, but George had not, and now George sat in a cell, furious, humiliated, his loyalty to his father unbroken. Through George, Arthur might yet strike back. That night, Brook returned to her lodgings above the draper's shop. Mrs. Golightly fussed over her as usual, speaking in long sentences strung with and but. Yet Brook barely heard. Her eyes were fixed on the shadows outside. A man loitered beneath the lamplight, feigning disinterest. The same figure she had glimpsed before, hacking at a hedge, pretending at work. Arthur Lee's eyes, no doubt, peering from beneath the brim of his hat. She knew then that the final act was near. The inspector, ever skeptical of her instincts, dismissed her fears. "We've clipped the gang's wings, Miss Brook. Murray's done. George is in chains. Without them, Arthur has no teeth left." Brook shook her head. "You underestimate him. Desperation sharpens men. Inspector, he will strike where we least expect. Not for riches, but for Annie." And she was right. 2 nights later, the Sisterhood's house in paved court lay quiet, the children asleep, the sisters murmuring prayers by candlelight. Suddenly, the door burst inward. Arthur Lee stood framed in the shadows, his gaunt figure tall, his presence commanding. His hair had grayed in prison, his face lined with years of bitterness, but his eyes burned with the same cunning fire. "Annie," he called, his voice both coaxing and cruel. "Come to me, girl. You're mine, always mine." The sisters shielded her, but Arthur strode forward, striking one aside with a brutal shove. Annie clutched the nearest child to her chest, her face pale as chalk. Brook, who had anticipated the assault, stepped from the stairwell, revolver in hand. "Arthur Lee," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos, "you will go no further." He laughed, low and bitter. "A woman with a pistol thinks she can stop me. You don't know me, Miss Detective. I have survived chains and stone walls. Do you think one bullet frightens me?" "I don't need you frightened," Brook replied evenly. "I need you cornered. And you are." From the doorway, Inspector Gunning and his men surged in, rifles leveled. The trap had sprung. Brook had been right to bait him, and Arthur's pride had led him straight into it. For a moment, his eyes flickered with calculation, as if he might fight his way free. But even a desperate man knows when the game is lost. With a final curse, he dropped his weapon and let the irons close around his wrists. Annie collapsed into Sister Monica's arms, sobbing with relief. The children, startled but unharmed, clung together. The inspector exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. "By heaven, Miss Brook, you've done it again. The whole brood of them snared. Father, son, and accomplices alike. Surrey can sleep easier tonight." But Brook did not share his triumph. She looked at Annie, broken and trembling, and thought of the years stolen from her by her father's sins. Crime could be punished, yes, but the scars of blood and betrayal were not so easily erased. Still, justice had prevailed for now, and yet. Brook could not help but wonder, had the sisterhood truly been nothing more than innocent women of charity? Or had their secrecy concealed something more? She had seen their kindness. Yes, but also their silence, their guarded ways. Some truths, perhaps, would remain locked behind convent walls. And as dawn broke over Redhill, Brook knew one thing for certain: evil had many disguises, but so did goodness, and sometimes it was the hardest disguise of all to recognize. Arthur Lee's trial was swift and merciless. His reputation as a seasoned criminal preceded him, and the evidence gathered by Inspector Gunning left little doubt. The attempted burglary at North Cape, the plan to extinguish its electric lights, the violent break-in at Paved Court all pointed back to him as the orchestrator. George Lee, still bitter and unrepentant, stood by his father in the dock, John Murray. His debts laid bare, could only mutter about bad luck and lost wagers together. They faced long sentences, their names etched forever into the ledgers of crime. But Annie Lee did not stand accused. Brook made certain of that. Before the magistrates, she testified clearly. Annie had sought only refuge, hiding from a father who wished to use her as a tool. The sisterhood had sheltered her, not as an accomplice, but as a lost soul in need of sanctuary. Even the inspector, once quick to condemn, admitted he had seen no evidence of Annie's guilt. She was free. Yet freedom was not the same as peace. In the weeks that followed, Annie remained with the sisterhood, caring for the children as though they were her own. Brook watched her from a distance, noting how the little ones clung to her skirts, how she smiled through her grief, how she found a purpose in the simple acts of comfort and care. It was not the life she might once have dreamed of, but perhaps it was the life she needed most. Inspector Gunning, still wrestling with his faith in phrenology and criminal types, tried to make sense of it all. "I swear," he muttered over brandy one evening, "that Sister Monica has the face of a born criminal, coarse, repellent, everything my books describe. And yet you tell me she is innocent." Brook smiled faintly. "I tell you what I observed, Inspector. Tenderness cannot be faked. I have seen criminals show rough kindness, yes, but never true gentleness. Sister Monica carried those crippled children with more love than a mother might. Whatever her face suggests to your science, her heart says otherwise." The inspector grumbled but said no more. Brook knew he would cling to his theories, even when evidence contradicted them. That was the nature of men like him, certain in their rules, even when the truth slipped beyond them. As winter deepened, Redhill slowly returned to its rhythms. The grand houses, once plagued by fear, gleamed again with the safety of locked doors and wary servants. The sisterhood continued their rounds, donkey cart rattling faithfully through the villages, their reputation slowly healing from suspicion, and Brook herself prepared to leave, her task complete. On her final day in town, she walked once more to Paved Court. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter rising against the cold air. Annie stood among them, her silver shawl catching the pale light, her eyes softer now. Though still touched by sorrow, she looked up as Brook approached, and for a moment their gazes held. "Thank you," Annie whispered, her voice almost carried away by the wind, "not for saving me, but for believing me." Brook inclined her head. "Hold to the life you've chosen. Annie, let your father's shadow end with him. The children need you, and perhaps, in caring for them, you will find the peace denied to you until now." Annie nodded, her hand brushing a child's hair. "I hope so." Brook turned and walked away, her step steady, her heart heavy but resolved. She had seen enough of the world to know that justice was never perfect. But it was better than despair. Some wounds healed, others lingered. What mattered was whether one chose to live in the scar or beyond it. That night, as she boarded her train back to London, Brook looked out across the dark countryside. How many more gangs plotted in the shadows? How many more women, like Annie, were caught between family and freedom, between loyalty and survival? She did not know, but she knew her work was far from over. The world was wide, crime was endless, and she would meet it wherever it hid. And so ended the case of the Redhill Sisterhood, a tale of deception in disguise, of innocence mistaken for guilt, of a daughter who defied her father, and a detective who trusted her instincts over appearances. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Annie's place, fled, fought, or forgiven?